So we're gonna have some fun here. This is a little bit different for me. I have a good friend and a client, and used to be a neighbor. This is Matthew next to me, and when I was at my worst, suffering from electromagnetic poisoning, we sold our house in the it would have been the late summer, early fall of 2019. And we moved into a rental house, and by God's grace, it was close to Matthew and Danny, and that's where we became friends and shared the passion that we both have for, you could call it non-native EMF or synthetic EMF versus, what God's given us in the creation here. So I know you're involved with sovereign sustainability. We haven't had a chance to talk in a while, but what's your interest in EMF now, and where is sovereign sustainability on that? And let's just have kind of a chat.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, thank you, Keith, for the intro. And I'm super excited to chat. Me and Keith have had quite a few conversations about not only EMF, but just health and wellness and just being the best that we can be. So I'm excited to have this conversation. And my brand is Sovereign Sustainability, and our mission is to help individuals be a sovereign unit that is not reliant on the system, the supply chain, the media, all those things. And a big portion of that is health and wellness. And so me and my family, we take EMF considerations very heavily. So I'm a firm believer that a lot of the, as you said, non-native EMF type frequencies are not natural, and this technology is very new and it's growing so rapidly, especially over the last 20 or 30 years, that there's got to be some sort of repercussion for this exposure to this EMF. And I'm not somebody that's going to tell you not to use modern technology. I think modern technology is also a huge blessing, but I think when we're too reliant on those things, there are negative repercussions for our health, our mental well-being, etc. So yeah, we take this topic very seriously. I'm excited to chat with you more about it.
Yeah, and I remember when we first met, I think your car battery was dead.
Yep.
And so you needed to get into town, and we should probably tell people that town is a long way from where we were living. We were living kind of out in the hinter boonies, not a sort of a half-hour walk from town, but a ways. So I had the chance, you and I drove together, and we were looking for this car battery, and we ended up talking about all these things with regard to EMF. And you, if I recall correctly, you and Danny were just getting prepared to go on a trip. I think it was Florida, is that right?
Correct, you got it right.
And you had this concern about, you had only one child at that time, and he was a baby, and you were worried about exposures for him because you weren't going to be able to necessarily control the environment. You were staying with family, I think. And we didn't have time to get you meters, right? And we didn't have a lot of time to do a training. But what we did is Laura and I came over, we did an assessment of your home. And then, as I recall, we just did a training for what kind of things can you do in any environment to, even without any meters, have a good likelihood that you're reducing exposures. And so it was about maintaining distance from electrical appliances and the things that obviously had big fields, big magnetic fields. If there is a router and you can't unplug it because other people want to use it, it's a matter of just creating as much distance as you can from that and maybe sneaking it off at night and just things like that. And that was sort of the first time that we got together on this. And your thinking has evolved quite a bit since last time. I think it was probably 5 years ago when we...
Oh my gosh, I've learned so much. I learned a lot from that day. We did meet the first day. My car battery died. I ran over to their house. I had never met them before. I think you guys might have just moved in or recently. And I asked for some help, and Keith volunteered to drive me into town to get a new battery. And
I just thought you wanted a cup of sugar, but that wasn't it. It was more.
Right. And it was funny. One of the first things he asked me when we were driving in his truck into town was like, how do you feel about airplane moding your phone? And I was like, okay, this question is either he's either a kook or he's a super genius, and he's somebody that I'm really going to respect.
Kook, right?
Because you know, I'm at the time I had already been into a little bit the whole EMF, Wi-Fi, like learning about health benefits and you know, how those things impact your health. Before I met him, we dove more into it after meeting Keith, and so I'm very grateful that I got to meet him because he taught me so much. So I airplane moded my phone, and our conversation just took off from there. And we learned a lot about routers, exposure to dirty electricity, electromagnetic frequencies, different things like that. And so it was a game changer for me that he came in and taught me some different things. And going off the router thing, he mentioned, you know, being distance from a router. We're both connected with Pleasant Meadow Creamery, which is a raw dairy farmer here in town. And my wife and I, when we first moved here to Sandpoint, we were in a natural organic grocery store called Winter Ridge, and we met these guys that own Pleasant Meadow Creamery, and they had told us a story about how they had just installed Wi-Fi, and they have a lot of cows. They installed that Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden, their heifers were not calving, meaning they weren't getting pregnant. And so they were like, not sure what was going on. They gave it some time. Immediately, they were like, well, maybe it's the Wi-Fi because it's the only thing that changed since then. And they've had these cows for, I'm pretty sure they've had them for a really, really long time. So they unplugged their Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden, all the cows got pregnant. And so we were like, okay, that's pretty interesting. So that was one of the things that drove us down this path of learning more about Wi-Fi and EMF and all that. And this was before I met you, and then I met you, and you did some tests in our house, and it opened my mind to a lot of things.
Yeah, and we do both have a connection with Pleasant Meadow Creamery. I have a secret life, which I will now reveal. I am one day a week a milkman. So I worked for over 60 years, but I wouldn't give that up for the world. We're talking about grass-fed raw milk in glass containers. And if you guys have never tried that, you really need to see if you can source that in your own location. And I think we both feel pretty strongly about local production of healthy foods.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I think local production of food is so important, and that's a whole nother avenue we can go down with, you know, environmental toxins, you know, EMF being a type of environmental toxin, especially the non-native ones. Because obviously there's natural EMF, electromagnetic frequencies, but there's a lot of unnatural ones that are more modern, last 20 to 30 years, you know, Wi-Fi, 4G, 5G, all those different things. So, but yeah, huge proponent of natural organic. And I think it's not only really important for health and wellness. Our mission, once again, at Sovereign Sustainability is to help you be a sustainable unit that is sovereign. You don't have to rely on anybody else to provide for yourself. I believe that God provided everything for us in nature to provide for us for the most part. And I think when we rely too heavily on man-made things like Wi-Fi and cell phones and computers and supply chain, we end up with a lot of health issues. And so, yeah, I think natural organic food especially is one of the biggest things.
Yeah, so in my the other 6 days of the week, when I'm not delivering fresh raw milk, I work full-time as an independent EMF consultant. And what I do is I go into people's homes and I perform an assessment of the different types of EMF and let them know, probably for the first time in their lives, what their levels of exposure are to the different phenomena associated with synthetic EMF. And it's often shocking for people to see how much of which types of non-native EMF they're being exposed to. And then, of course, there's the remediation part. We don't rely on harmonizers, neutralizers, crystals, you know, funny things. It's all physics-based. We're talking about using physics to reduce personal exposure, either removing the source, creating distance from the source, or as a last resort, doing shielding. So we could talk about any of a number of different things. What do you want to discuss from the EMF perspective?
100%. This is why I'm excited to have this conversation. Me and Keith have talked a lot, and he's the EMF expert. EMF is a huge part of sovereign sustainability because health and wellness and performance is a huge part of what I think is important for you to be a sovereign unit off the system. If you don't have health and wellness, you can't really do much. You can't provide your own food. You can't provide your own shelter. You can't do all of these things that require you to be at your best. And so if you're not taking EMF exposure into your performance and your ability to do things as a factor that either helps or hinders your ability to perform, then I think you're missing an extreme element. You look at professional athletes and things like that, they're always looking for that edge that can help them be the best athlete they can be. And I think EMF is something that everybody should consider. A lot of people just wave off EMF as like, oh, it's some nebulous thing that has no effect. And it's, I think, philosophically incorrect to look at anything as having no effect. Everything has an effect, positive or negative. And we're talking predominantly about health and wellness right now. And so EMF, non-native EMF exposure is going to have either a positive or a negative effect. And unfortunately, a lot of the media promotes that it has no negative effect. And I just don't think that makes any sense. And so today I want to talk a lot about just ways that we can safeguard ourselves from EMF exposure, some of the things that I've learned about EMF exposure, some of the things that we do for health and wellness in general. And also I want to end with some questions from the EMF expert over here, Keith, and get your take on how some of these things affect us. First thing, subject matter that we both discussed, and this played a lot. You taught me a little bit about this, and I've learned about this before as well, is earthing and grounding. So I figured that'd be a good first subject matter. So I've done earthing. I didn't realize there was a difference between grounding and earthing. I used to call it grounding all the time, but grounding and earthing are two different things. And so I just really learned the distinction between those two things today. And I realized you were trying to explain that to me when you first came over into that test, because we were talking about how to earth your bed, right? Because you can set it up so that when you're sleeping, you're connected to the earth. And we were talking about how you can have these earthing sheets and you connect them all the way into a grounding rod in the actual earth. And we made the mistake of getting these earthing sheets and connecting it to our grounding outlet on our wall. And this is how I learned about the difference between earthing and grounding, is that, earthing is earth. You're literally connecting to the earth. So if you're barefoot on the earth, that's earthing. Grounding is when you're connected to the ground in your outlets. Totally different things produce different results. And I was just learning today about how a lot of the dirty electricity is funneled out of your electric through the ground in your house. So that's a mistake that we've made, and I'm just learning about. So I would love to, get some of your take on that difference between earthing and grounding and how you think that affects our health.
Yeah, so the voices that I listen to the most are the people who have suffered the most. So my own journey, I was misdiagnosed and mistreated medically for 39 years. Not one physician in 2 different states, in at least a dozen cities that I lived in during those times, not one physician really caught what was going on with my health as it began eroding right around the time of 1G, the first generation of cell phones. And electromagnetic poisoning, which is the term that I use to describe it. I don't say I'm electro-hypersensitive, because you don't blame the poison or the person who's being poisoned for being too darn sensitive. You blame the poison. So the voices that I tend to listen to the most are not necessarily the most celebrated celebrities and things like that in the medical realm or whatnot. I look for the people who have endured for many years, and I just met a man who has 80 years of suffering with electromagnetic poisoning, and he has quite a lot to teach. Recently, I've been talking to Gary Lee Duncan, who's been suffering for 30 years, and then also the authors, Shannon Rowan wrote Wi-Fi Refugee, Julia Lupine, she wrote Under a Rock. Both of them took the strategy of running for a safe place, trying to find a life that they can live in this now toxic world apart from synthetic EMF. And when I talk to people who I really believe are in the know, like their life depends upon it,
Yep.
every one of them talks about the importance of getting their bare feet on the ground. And whether you want to call it grounding or earthing or whatever, if you can put your bare feet on the ground, that has been such an important part of everybody's story. And Matthew was talking just a minute ago about this environment we have been provided, this natural environment. And I think it is the antidote in many ways, not medical advice, but I think it is the antidote for this crazy, unbridled, continuing, escalating exposure to radio frequency radiation in particular. So let's get into the specifics of it. You can use grounding sheets and earthing products, and I know people that do that. And if you're going to use those products, you have a choice of how do you get the product in your home that you're in contact with then connected to the earth. And people will sometimes do that then with a wire. And then the question is, do I plug the wire into the so-called ground portion of the electrical outlet after you've checked to make sure that's indeed a properly wired outlet? Some people will do that. That ground wire, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, that ground wire is actually connected to the common conductor at the service entrance. So you are really becoming a part of the electrical system then. And there can be a lot of, dirty electricity and whatnot, exposures associated with that. The other way to do that, other than plugging into the receptacle and the ground portion of the receptacle, is that people will use a grounding product and they will put in a ground rod outside the home, outside the bedroom, and run a wire out and connect to that. I feel that that's a better that's a better method. But I have to be honest, the people that I respect the most in terms of knowing for a long period of time that their life is at risk and their health is at risk, and they've been in many cases running for their lives, they don't use grounding products. They put their bare feet on the ground. That's what they'll do. Now, there's an argument can be made that there is no safe place to ground, particularly in North America, because of this crazy situation we have with the way the electric grid has been implemented. Not many people are aware of this, but like 70% of the current that comes from power generation returns to that point of generation or a substation through the earth, not through a wire, which is insane. And they don't do that in other parts of the world. But here in North America, we have that to contend with. And it creates a huge alternating current magnetic field as well. So some people will argue that there is no safe earthing in North America. I'm not quite there. I would say if I were in a big city, I wouldn't earth next to a substation. I wouldn't earth next to a Bitcoin mining facility, a cell phone tower, an optical fiber network relay. These places that are going to have a lot of very strange frequencies going on. But I would seek the natural places, and I would look for as pristine environment as you can find. Now, you can get into it a little bit further, and you can get meters, and you can use those to ascertain whether you have high AC magnetic fields in the area. And you can take an oscilloscope, which I've done before, and put two probes in the ground. You can actually see the waveform, if there is one, that's in the area. But I just counsel people, if they're interested in getting the benefits of being in contact with the earth, as all animals and all plants are, that you give it a try and see how that works for you. Maybe keep a log and determine whether things are getting better for you or worse. So I hope that wasn't too long of an explanation.
No, that's fascinating. This is why I'm excited to have this conversation with you, because there's so many questions I have about this, and I'm trying to figure out how I can operate best, how my family can operate best, and how our viewers can do things to enhance their health and mitigate these negative health repercussions of our power grid and all these different environmental toxins. So That was extremely good information, and I just want to reiterate, that's why I'm talking to Keith, because he is the research expert. I come at this more from like a common sense philosophical perspective, in that like I don't do a lot of EMF research necessarily, but I'm just thinking about it from a common sense standpoint. Like, these are new technologies. We don't have enough scientific research to say whether or not they're good or bad for our health, but they're new, and humans have been around naturally in nature without satellites and power grids and cell phone towers, and these things have only been around, some of them for 20 or 30 years. So it's got to have some effect on our health. And so to me, it's just common sense that there's probably some negative repercussions to these things. So that's very interesting about how some people think that, earthing, because of the way our power grid is in North America, that there may not even be a good source of earthing necessarily. So that actually brings me to another question for you. I know sometimes electric is underground, right? They'll run into your house underground. In our neighborhood, they have that. Sometimes it's run on power lines. So my question to you is, have you done any tests around areas where power is underground versus overhead on power lines? And if so, how do you think that affects people's grounding ability?
Yeah, so running the electric wires above ground, it began right around 1889. And that was the year, now this is going to sound kooky, but that was the year that influenza, for the first time in history, became an annual event. Mm-hmm. And people are saying, what does that have to do? Well, influenza, the name influenza, actually has a meaning. The meaning is influence of the stars. And historically, and people wrote about this, Daniel Webster, for example, wrote about this many, many years ago, and others, and there was this correlation between sunspot cycles and influenza. And it wasn't as though every sunspot cycle had an influenza epidemic. That wasn't the case. There were physicians that practiced their entire careers and never saw a case of influenza. But when it erupted, it was always at that sort of solar maximum. And what happens at a solar maximum? Sunspot activity. What happens from sunspot activity? You have an emission of an unnaturally strong magnetic field that comes to the Earth. So correlation isn't causation. You make of that what you will. But what I will say is, when we started stringing these long antennas, and you're saying, what antenna? The wire, that we drive everywhere and we see these wires. We think it's a normal part of life. But those act like antennas, and they liberate the signal, if you will. North America, 60 hertz. Other parts of the world, 50 hertz. They liberate that into the environment. And ever since we started doing that, 1889, influenza's been a yearly event. So your question to me was, underground utilities versus above ground utilities, which is best? Underground. Underground is best. And there's some caveats, like anything else that's related to EMF. There are some details, but if we could wave a magic wand and put every electric wire that there is under the ground, as opposed to in the air, I think everybody would feel it instantly. I think we would benefit like you couldn't believe.
Interesting.
And I'm not saying that electric power is safe. Never has been shown. In fact, there's a correlation between all the disease of civilization, featuring, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, for example, correlate perfectly with the rollout of the electric grid. So I'm not saying the electric grid is without harm. You're saying, what? Everybody, you don't have to sleep in an electric field. And where Matthew and I used to live, if you just turn off the electricity to the house, you've got this pristine level of, no electric field exposure. So back to the question. So underground or above ground, underground is always better. But then you have to make sure that you're not putting anything dear to you over where those wires run. So if you have underground utilities, which we did in the old neighborhood,
right,
and it was near the roadway, Boy, you can measure that with a meter. And the Earth attenuates the electric field portion, but the magnetic field goes right through the Earth. So you have to make sure you don't put your livestock, your pets, and you don't want to put yourself on top of a electrical distribution line.
Fascinating. Okay, I have so many questions. Yeah, that's interesting. So grounding, obviously I was thinking about grounding over, grounding water or grounding wire. So you don't want to ground over where there's electrical wire running under the ground. So that's obviously important. And then having it overhead, is obviously not good. So one thing I think about too, just going off how I think God provides everything for us out in nature to shield us from environmental toxins, especially man-made ones. Have you noticed, like, let's say there's tree line, obviously if there's electrical wire running behind the tree line, that probably shields you a little bit from any EMF exposure or electromagnetic frequencies. Have you noticed that, like doing any tests, that tree line is a good protector from environmental toxins?
There's four main types of synthetic EMF. So there's alternating current electric fields, alternating current magnetic fields, something called dirty electricity or conducted electromagnetic interference, and then there's radio frequency radiation. And all of those need to be treated separately. So if you're trying to reduce your radio frequency radiation, you don't do that in the same way you're going to reduce your electric field exposure. And so it's kind of, if you can imagine this big balloon and you step down on part of it, another one pops up, you still have to deal with that. And you have to deal with each of these four forces independently. So if you have a power line between your home and the road, we have a forest in between our home and the road right now where we are, and there are power lines out there, you're not going to get much attenuation from the trees for electric fields.
Got it.
However, for radio frequency radiation, you do get pretty good attenuation. The deciduous trees are better than the conifers. And then in the wintertime, when the deciduous trees lose their leaves, you lose that protection.
Interesting. Okay, fascinating.
And the trees are taking a hit. They are. Trees are not growing well. You're seeing all kinds of blight. I was speaking with a German osteopathic doctor on Monday or Tuesday this week, and he was telling me about birch trees beginning to grow crooked. I don't know if you've noticed that around here, but
definitely around here, yeah.
And that's from the cell towers. That's a sort of a different thing.
Got it. Two more things, just going off what you were saying earlier. You were mentioning when power lines were first put up, I think you said in the 1800s, influenza. You've referenced a book, I think it's called The Hidden Rainbow or Invisible Rainbow?
The Invisible Rainbow, yeah.
Invisible
great
Rainbow.
book, yeah.
I want to bring that up because I think it's a fascinating topic, and you can explain more on it in a second. I was actually just listening to, I have some family members, and we have all the vaccine stuff going on right now, and it's, we've got all these new vaccines. There's this whole talk about how we fought off polio, with vaccines. But Candace Owens, I was just listening to her speak about how actually that's not the case. Like, the research shows that we were just spraying DDT or something along those lines, and that was what was causing the polio to happen, or the reduce in immunity. And they stopped spraying that, and then all of a sudden the polio cases were going down, deaths were going down. And then she also talked about tetanus and all this kind of stuff. So I think that there's a lot of false understanding about what the statistics show as far as, different diseases and things like that, and how we've cured them. So can you give us a little bit on what that book explains as far as virology and, how some of these historical viruses have been contracted and expanded across a nation, and why we might be looking at health and wellness revolving around viruses incorrectly?
Yeah, I think if you were going to buy one book to try to understand EMF, synthetic EMF, and its impact on life, that would be the book to get. It would be Arthur Furstenberg's Invisible Rainbow. And so there's so much in that book. It is one of the few books in my life that I've read more than once. So that's saying a lot. There's a lot of richness in that book. And one of the things that he talks about is the so-called Spanish flu, and tests that were done by two separate medical doctors that were assigned to the military. And this is my recollection, and I think it's correct. There was one doctor who conducted experiments in a hospital ship. I believe it was in the Boston area. And the other one used the quarantine facility at Angel Island, which is in the San Francisco Bay, so East Coast and West Coast. What I'm about to tell you is documented, by the way, in two different places, the Journal of the American Medical Association and something called the Boston Surgical Journal, which became the New England Journal of Medicine. So you can read about it in either one of those places. And there's also a public health report that was issued, and that's free to access. And so what happened is the most fascinating thing. You know, we have this idea about contagion, we have this idea about viruses, and just really fascinating. They wanted to show, because the theory of infection and infectious agents and whatnot was not that old, and they wanted to show the transmissibility and the infectious nature of the Spanish flu. So they referred to what are called fresh flu cases. And what they did is they found healthy volunteers. I think maybe they were volunteered from prisons, but I'm not sure. And what they would do is they would put a fresh flu case face to face. And I'm talking about if Matthew and I were like this. And the experiment began with the fresh flu case exhaling into my face and mouth while I'm inhaling. And so what they were trying to do was show that the Spanish flu could be transmitted in this way. And they had, if I recall, 100 volunteers. So they tried that. They tried the face-to-face. After that, they tried the fresh flu case coughing into the face and mouth of the person while they were breathing in. And they also tried taking secretions from the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, you know, phlegm and whatnot of the fresh flu case. And then they put it in the eyes and the nose and the mouth of the recipient. And finally, what they did is they took those same secretions and they injected them subcutaneously in the healthy volunteer. That would be me in this case. So out of 100 trial victims, trial participants, do you know how many transmissions they got?
Zero.
They got zero.
Yeah.
They got zero, which is really, it's a phenomenal thing. So what does that mean? That's probably a good thing for people to think about. And please don't take my word for it. I've given you the references for where you can read about that.
Yeah, so I think this is one thing people need to think about, especially today. A lot of people come from this almost scientific perspective where they treat science as it's the be all end all. And I think science is great. One of the things about science, though, is we talked about correlation, not causation. And on top of that, theories are just theories. Science never proves fact. The only fact science proves is if you do this study, you get this result. But the underlying stuff that's going on behind it, it doesn't prove fact. It's just collecting data, really, is all science is. And then they formulate theories off this. And I think it's important for people to look at theories and realize that that's all they are. They're just theories. Theories change, and with more data, we can change those theories. And on top of that, too, you got to think about all the science that's collected, how much of it is truthful, how much of it was skewed data that we can't go back and change. And so I think, a lot of times we have really faulty theories on how things work, virology being one of them, and how we, get sick. We're missing a lot of information on how that works. So yeah, definitely. I think that book would be a good one to pick up and read. And there was another portion on the book where you're talking about how there were two main scientists at the time who were studying virology, and they both had differing theories. And my understanding is that one of them on his deathbed was the one that, you know, people touted as the main virologist. His theory was the most accurate, and on his deathbed he said the other guy was correct. Was that part of the book? Am I getting that right?
Yes, I believe so. But anyway, and that is documented other places. So I think we're talking about Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp, I believe was the name. And so Béchamp was a champion of what was called terrain theory, and Pasteur was a champion of the germ theory of medicine. You know, that's whatever outside the body can come and infect you and make you sick. And Béchamp was about watching after your internal terrain. And so they were both French scientists, as I understand, and they had a bitter rivalry. Pasteur received the greater economic backing, but at the end of his life, Pasteur recanted and basically admitted that no, it is the terrain that is the important fact. And I'm not suggesting that there isn't things that you can't take and that will make you sick.
Right.
I had a roommate in college who was doing an organic chemistry experiment using protozoa, and he was trying to supposed to transfer some from a beaker to wherever they were going with a pipette. I guess the pipette looked like a straw to him, and he was pretty sick for a while. So I'm not at all saying we can't be harmed by things that we take in,
Sure.
but the fact that they were unable to show, even with something that had a real significant mortality rate like the Spanish flu,
Right.
they couldn't show transmission. I just think that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I think a lot of times these theories, sometimes it's a combination of the two. It's not just one gets thrown out and then, one is correct. I think a lot of times we disregard certain theories, and essentially the, non-touted scientist, his theory was something along the lines of how, like, in order to contract sickness, it's more about what's going on in our body. So like if a sickness goes around, everybody's going to quote get it to some extent, but not everybody's going to show symptoms, I think is kind of his theory. And I'm probably butchering it quite a bit, but really it comes down to like, is our immune system strong? And I think that ties into the electromagnetic radiation and frequencies, because it appears to me that a lot of times when we're exposed to these EMFs and different types of radiation, that allows our body to be overrun with these sicknesses, versus it's just simply, oh, you've got the sickness, you gave it to me, I get sick. It's more along the lines of like, sure, you did give it to me, but my immune system is compromised because of the environmental toxins, and so therefore this thing has the room it needs to expand and fight my body and grow. I don't know, did I say that well?
Yeah, I think people are married to this idea of germ theory of medicines. It's certainly being propagated by, whatever is accepted by normal medicine, at least in the United States. It's just that it hasn't been proven. And then a lot of people will say, well, if we don't get sick from these things that we can't see, viruses, for example, then how does it work? I don't know. I don't know how it works. Am I required to know the answer to that, to say that if you can't show transmissibility, then your theory? I don't think I'm required to have the answer. I do think it's very interesting to go back and look at the definition of influenza, which means influence of the stars, and was always in antiquity correlated with these sunspot events, which are electromagnetic phenomenon. So you guys got to go the last inch. You got to put this together in your own mind in a way that makes sense to you. I will say, since I try to know, love, and serve the living God, that I believe that our bodies are these self-healing mechanisms. It's really obvious for us in some ways. If we get a cut on our hand or on a finger or something like that, it heals. We don't think about it. We don't need to apply something external. It does. You withhold what's harmful and you give your body what's needful, and it takes care of it. If I break my arm, it'll heal. What a miracle. I mean, the bone will knit itself back together. And we just sort of take that for granted. And we're aware at some level that, yeah, it's supposed to do that. And yet, do we really think deeply about how we're healing every day from the insults and the contamination that we're receiving from the environment in the electromagnetic realm, in the chemical realm, in the particulate realm? I don't know that we really spend as much time thinking about that as we should. So I think, Matthew, I think it's about giving your body what's needful and withholding what is harmful, and there's healing. And I'll just give one other example. This is coming from a book called The Body Electric, which that would be my number 2 pick if you wanted to choose a second book to read about synthetic EMF exposures. So Dr. Robert O. Becker, wrote a book called The Body Electric, very successful, sold millions of copies, and it showed an electric basis of life. Now, he was an orthopedic surgeon, and one of the problems that existed at that point in time was non-union of bones. So that's where, you do break your arm, but it doesn't heal like it's supposed to. And one of the things that Becker found out was at the site of a wound, there's a voltage gradient that forms in the body. And when a bone is broken and there's electrical activity there as well. So he got this idea, and he put these little tiny electrodes in the 2 parts of the bone, and he applied just a whisper of current. And guess what happened? Many of the cases of bone non-union actually then began growing together. So this stuff is pretty deep. I had a career. My second career was on an ambulance. I can't tell you how many homes I've been into in Bonner County, how many times I've put patches on people's chest and on their body. And what are we doing? We're looking at the electrical activity of the heart. Do we think about this?
Right.
People talk about maybe a pacemaker, you get an artificial pacemaker. Maybe they're affected by our cell phones or the microwave oven. And there have been warnings for things like that. And so they make the pacemakers more durable, and so that they can withstand that electromagnetic interference. What about my pacemaker? What about your pacemaker? We don't have the fake kind. We have the kind we were born with. Are we to believe somehow that if the electrical activity in the heart is so important that our normal pacemaker won't be affected by, this kind of synthetic EMF? So anyway.
Interesting. Wow. That's a lot of really trippy information.
That too much for your
yeah. No, I think it's awesome. I want to get deeper into my understanding on this and think more philosophically about it. Get more actual research and data. Access the literature. I like that Keith is dropping a lot of different pieces of the literature you guys should definitely look up. So we'll definitely reference some of that in the description. On that note, I want to transition a little bit to now, how can we protect ourselves from certain environmental toxins like EMF and electromagnetic frequencies, radiation, dirty electricity, that kind of stuff. And I've got a couple categories here that I've listed. So maybe I'll go through those a little bit and then get your standpoint on like what are some best practices for things that we can do to protect ourselves. And so on that note, some of those categories, once again, we went over earthing. I think earthing is super important. Grounding, earthing, that kind of stuff. Diet, I would say, is a huge one. We get a lot of environmental toxins from our diet and our water, especially I think water is almost more important. One thing on that note too, a long time ago I heard from Sean Croxton from Underground Wellness that we actually we can absorb like 70% more toxins through our skin than we can through our digestive tract. And so when you're showering in certain types of water, you can absorb a lot of toxins. The percentages might be different than what I just said there, but that's what I recall from him a long time ago. So earthing, digestion, skin exposure. I just talked about water on the skin. So clothing would be a huge one. We can get toxins through our clothing. And I also was listening to a podcast today about how with EMF exposure, there are certain types of clothes that may or may not be more of a, this might not be the right word, but conductor for electromagnetic poisoning. And then yeah, I think there's a few other categories. Fresh air would be an important one. Light spectrums, so looking at sunlight, we get exposed to a lot of blue light and just light spectrums that are not natural. Certain types of bulbs, LEDs, things like that. So did I hit a lot of the important ones? And am I missing any?
There is so much. This topic is like an inch wide and 3 miles 3 miles deep.
Right.
But a lot of things that you mentioned are, I think, critically important for wellness. And, I think it was about 25 years ago, I came across some writing, and somebody was expressing the opinion that we needed to take responsibility for our own health. And this is like the first time in my life. This is crazy that I would think about that, but obviously, right? Mm-hmm. We need to take responsibility for our own health. And the other way to do it is to run your life in a way that you just do whatever the heck you want to do. And then when you get sick, the idea is you can go to somebody, they're going to make you well. I'm not sure that's going well. Right. I don't mean, I'm not sure that's the most profitable. So
agreed.
The pillars of health is something that are talked about in the naturopathic medical community. And those include many of the things that you've mentioned, and in particular, nutrition. So I think that can be so important. People have a propensity, myself included, I'm not immune from this, but people have this propensity to have a problem and then want to buy something to fix it. You know what I mean?
Quick solution.
Like, there's this problem over here, honey, can we, I want to buy something and fix that. And so I consider it to be both wonderful and tragic that people go out and they'll spend money on like harmonizers and neutralizers and chips they put on their phone. And what are they called? Subtle energy devices and vector or scalar energy, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I consider it to be great news because why? Well, because it indicates that people know there's a problem, right? At some level, a huge percent of the population knows that these cell phones are harming us, that the Wi-Fi is harming us, that living under the power lines is not a good thing, and but they're taking the wrong action. You see, because I use very sensitive instrumentation, and I don't. If I'm doing an assessment for a particular phenomenon, and I introduce a harmonizer or a nebulizer, whatever it is, a crystal, a mineral, it doesn't change anything. It's not like protecting the environment like people would think. So I propose that if you're that far, if you recognize that there's a problem, if you've bought one of the, don't feel bad. Before I learned assessment and remediation and whatnot, I bought a harmonizer and it cost $1,000. And I was at a point where my health was so depleted, I didn't have $1,000. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'm not trying to point a finger at everybody else. I fell for it. What I am trying to say is, remember we talked earlier about the people that I really respect are the people who have battled this for decades and they're survivors.
Right.
Not one of them talks about harmonizers, scalar energy devices, any kind of stuff like that. So just keep in mind, I would say, this natural human tendency to want to address a problem by just go buy something and it'll make it better.
Right.
And then the obvious solution, we talked about the pillars of health. I would suggest people look that up. Pillars of health.
Pillars of health. It's
sort of a term of art, if you will, and it's well understood what all those things are. But beyond that, it is so simple. It's like I got lead poisoning. Mm-hmm. Quit ingesting lead.
Right, right. Or mold.
I have asbestos. Yeah. I mean, anything. It can be mold toxicity. It can be whatever. Step one, quit exposing yourself. Mm-hmm. And then you can deal with detox and whatnot if it is mold or mercury or, any one of those things. Synthetic EMF is different. There's just no residual. There's a memory effect for sure, but there's nothing to flush out. So it is the only environmental toxin that people won't give up. Like, right? If you went through the trauma of healing from lead poisoning, like it accumulated in your bones and in your tissues and whatnot, and you went through a long process, now you're suffering permanent intellectual disability from the lead, but there are other things that can be reversed, and you've gone through this whole thing. And I offer you a glass of, whatever with lead in it. Are you going to have any? You're going to say, no way. I don't want any of that. But people can't stay away from their what?
Smartphones,
baby. Wi-Fi,
Bluetooth.
Yeah.
My gosh, that's interesting. So with the lead and the mold, for example, like let's say you have mold, right? To go with your analogy, it'd be like if somebody went and bought something that fortifies their health against mold instead of like killing the mold, getting rid of the water damage and spraying something to kill the mold, which I like to use like vinegar because it's more natural. But with the EMF, it's a tough one because there are some EMF frequencies and different radiation and electromagnetic type stuff that we can cut out, which I think we should get into next. And there are certain ones we can't. I can't go and get rid of the cell tower. I can't go and get rid of town. So this is an interesting topic because I do think that there are certain environmental toxins that we can absolutely 100% without a doubt cut out. And I've got some ideas, and I'd love to pick your brain on which ones you think. And then there are certain ones that we can't cut out, so we do have to almost put up a shield from it. So what are some of those things that you think are really easy for a family, especially one with young kids, that they can just cut out or reduce?
Yeah, so I interviewed this last week a woman. This was for my 100th episode of my audio podcast. I do a weekly podcast all about EMF, of course, and how to divorce yourself from the synthetic EMF. So the 100th episode was special to me. It may not have been special to anybody else, but only 4% of podcasters who start make it to their 100th episode. So I wanted it to be special. Wow. I obsessed about it for weeks and months. And what I chose for my 100th episode was to the children. Of course, the children. And so it begins with the Baby Safe Project. And so this is something that anybody can do. You don't need this brochure. You're welcome to get one if you like. It's babysafeproject.org. But it just introduces the idea that don't nuke your baby while it's in development in the womb. Mm-hmm. Well, gosh, that would be giving up a lot. Well, I don't know. I mean, some people avoid eating tuna because they don't want to expose their developing baby to mercury, and other people avoid flour, and other people avoid alcohol. And this is not new to avoid things that that might cause harm.
Right.
And you know what? If you're skeptical and you're saying, I don't believe this EMF stuff, and I would just say then, how about take a precautionary approach? Okay. So there's this thing called a precautionary approach, which basically says that if there is something in the environment that hasn't been proven to be safe, maybe avoid it.
Right.
Until maybe in the fullness of time, by legitimate scientists, it's shown to be without harm. And we haven't passed that with synthetic EMF. In fact, there's a lot of proof of harm. So to answer your question, let's start with our babies. They can't fend for themselves. Don't nuke them. And what does that mean? That means while the mother is pregnant, could you give up your smartphone? And if you can't give it up, don't put it on your belly.
Right.
Don't put it on a pocket right there next to the baby. Maybe if you have to have one, can you do it at arm's length? Can you put it remote? Can you use that Air headset? Just creating that distance is going to be a big help. And then you go from there and you say, now, once that baby is born, I realize that it's convenient to have a baby monitor, but are you aware that a baby monitor spews pulse modulated radio frequency radiation continuously? And what do? You take it and you put it next to the baby. Well, Chris, the closer you are, the greater the intensity of the exposure. So you have the right instinct, which is you want to care for your child and make sure that you're attentive to the child, but maybe don't nuke the child, by putting a baby monitor there. Maybe position the child in your bedroom or somewhere close by and do what our ancestors did, which is be attentive.
Right.
And I'm sorry if I'm saying don't be lazy, but I'm saying don't be lazy.
Yeah, and addicted too is another word that I would put out there. I think with smartphones, what percentage of people actually need their smartphone when they're around their family? Do you really need your smartphone around your family? When you're with your family, you're with the most important people and the people that you are shepherding or you're protecting. So you don't need your cell phone. Like, there's almost no emergency that could happen that you need it right there all the time. So when you're with your family, there's no reason why you can't have a digital detox and set that phone out of the room. I would also add too, when you're sleeping, I think a lot of people have their phones near them. I get alarms, I get all that. You can get you can get like a manual alarm. You don't need to have your cell phone right where you're sleeping. You can have it in another room. At the very least, airplane moded. Unfortunately, I have heard even when it's airplane moded or even when it's turned off, that it doesn't actually cut off the battery. So it's technically still running, which is a whole nother conversation. But you can definitely, there's no reason why you can't remove that phone from your midst when you're hanging out with your family. At the very least, if for some reason you can prove that it doesn't impact your health and the kid's health, it will definitely make you more present with that child. So they'll get more emotional and communication benefits because you won't be on your phone, you'll be interacting with the child.
Yeah, and so I meet people where they are, and that might be too big of an ask for some people. For Matthew, if I said get rid of your phone, he'd get rid of his phone. But that might be too much of an ask for some people. And okay, I get it. I understand. Here's something you can do though. You can get a regular old traditional phone and have it installed in your house. In fact, what a lot of people don't know, Matthew, is that in Idaho, there's something called the carrier of last resort. Mm-hmm. And no matter where you live, they have to install a phone at their cost. Mm-hmm. At least to your property. You might have to take it into the house. But anyway, get an ordinary telephone. And when you hit the front door, when you come back from your work or your shopping or whatever it is, forward your calls. Mm-hmm. Turn it off. Some of these devices don't stop radiating. Wrap them in aluminum foil. Put it in a metal cookie tin, something like that. Then it can't radiate you. And then you'll know that you're not going to miss a phone call. And there are applications that you can run on your computer so you can still do your texting. And if you like, you can do the social media. But, we are all addicted, and people are going to have to reconcile with that. Yep. So there's this great documentary called The Social Dilemma, and they talk about the dopamine-driven response cycle. Mm-hmm. How does that work? It's a type of cybernetic programming. Cybernetic, this guy's a loony. Maybe. Look it up. See for yourself. But you provide a certain stimulus, you get a certain behavior, and then you get a reward in there. And it used to be based on food. Mm-hmm. And now it's based on the production of dopamine. We all have a pharmacy in our minds. Mm-hmm. And so you get a like on a post, or you get a text message from your sweetie, or you get whatever. It gives you that little lift. The screen itself emits a type of light that's really foreign to nature. It's abundant. It's rich in blue light, mm-hmm. which we only experience naturally in the morning when we first get up, and it triggers the production of cortisol. Now, cortisol is a good thing in the morning to get you going and help prepare you for the assaults and the insults of the day. But you keep looking at this thing, and you keep looking at this thing, and it's noon, and now it's 3 p.m., and now it's 6 p.m., and now it's 10 p.m., and you're still telling your body this notion of circadian biology that it's noon or it's early in the morning or whatever. And so you're getting cortisol. Well, what does that mean? Who cares? Well, cortisol and melatonin have this inverse relationship. And so if your cortisol production is high, your melatonin production is going to be low, and vice versa. So insomnia, anyone, you know, not to mention melatonin has a job aside from sleep induction. It's probably the best antioxidant in the whole body. But you're going to have to rein me in, Matthew, because I get going on this stuff and I won't stop. But
This is awesome. You mentioned something like cybernetics. I don't know what the term was you just said, but talking about how we're addicted to our phones. Elon Musk is someone I'm going to bring up, and he specifically said that we are already cyborgs, if you think about it, because we rely on our smartphone and devices to take care of our needs. If you think about it, we make our currency through our smart devices, which means we're getting fed, sheltered, and everything through our devices. And that's a very interesting rabbit hole to go down. So yeah, I would say we're way too reliant on our devices, and it is literally taking care of our needs, which I think there's repercussions that come with that, because once again, we're not tuning into the natural earth that God designed for us to procure our needs from. Instead, we're using these man-made devices. And going back to what you were saying about meeting people where they are, I think that's really important. I think a lot of people where they are right now is they're not even willing to look at EMF or electromagnetic type stuff as like scientifically proven as not beneficial for your health and well-being. I think that's where 90% of people are in America, unfortunately. And so for that, even though, so Keith mentions the people that are harmed the most, going to those people, you're probably going to get the best information from. But I also realize meeting people where they're at, a lot of people are not ready to go to these people who have had real serious altercations from being exposed to EMF. And so they're just not going to connect with that because maybe they haven't had what they think is extreme negative repercussions from being exposed to EMF. So what I recommend for people trying to meet them where the average American is at, there's 3 name drops that I want to drop that I think are in the common media that are saying that you should be looking at EMF exposure as an environmental toxin, and there are probably some things you need to be doing to safeguard your health and the health of your family. The first one being Dr. Dewin. He's one that I just listened to today, who's a PhD, and he has a lot of research and articles that he cites and things that he recommends should be done to protect yourself from radiation exposure, EMF especially. Another one is Andrew Huberman. He has a lot of literature that he cites on neural health, and he talks about Bluetooth, EMF exposure, Wi-Fi, not just heat and stuff like that from smart devices, but the radio frequencies specifically having an effect on hormones and health and well-being. And then the final one is a guy who's promoting the carnivore diet. Paul Saladino. There we go. Paul Saladino is the third one I wanted to name drop. These are 3 people that are in the common media today that are saying you need to be taking care of your health and that EMF is a big problem. And so, although I don't think they're the leading experts in these subject matters by any means, for folks who are not quite ready to make that jump to like there could be potential negative health benefits to EMF exposure and electromagnetic frequencies and things like that, I think that's a good start to at least going down that path. And then, once you get some of the broadly, accepted data, which might not be the most, it might not be the best data to go with to actually learn about what the negative repercussions of these things are. At least that'll get you going down that path, and it'll help you to maybe get to the point where it's like, okay, I need to at least look at EMF as a potential environmental hazard. And then I would suggest EMF remedy. Keith here he's going to have some of the best information on how to go about protecting yourself from these things. So that was just a little bit on meeting people where they're at. I don't know if you have any input on that. If not, we can go on. I've got some questions that I wanted to go over. Anything we missed as far as like what people can do to protect themselves from EMF exposure, other environmental toxins? We talked about blue light and that kind of stuff. What else? Anything we missed there?
Yeah, there's an article that I wrote with this topic in mind for the Weston A. Price Journal. I don't know if you've talked to your followers about Weston A. Price.
Yeah,
he was a American dentist, and he noticed that indigenous peoples were they were having their health dramatically affected when their diet became influenced by, the typical Western diet. So he lived 100 years ago, and he was going around to indigenous cultures and seeing how they lived and what they ate, and seeing what happened when they changed their diet. So I was invited to write an article, which I did and published it in the summer of 2022. The name of Weston A. Price's quarterly publication is Wise Traditions. And the whole article is about understanding the four basic phenomenon, and then things that you can do in every single case, even if you don't have access to a meter. And you can go all the way from that kind of an introductory, hey, honey, here's some easy things that we can do. We can turn the router off at night, or cell phones, like I mentioned. We can go all the way from that to I help people purpose-built homes that have what I call durable countermeasures built in, because, and this goes back to the name of your effort, which is sovereign sustainability. Are you sovereign in your home? That's a question. That's a fair question. Are you sovereign in your home? And you're saying, of course. Really? If you didn't want the radio frequency radiation to be in your home, could you stop it? And the answer is wireless trespass. Wireless trespass. I got that term from a guy sojourning in the desert for 30 years. And I think it beautifully describes what is going on right now. So the more you think about this, the more you think, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be, the Lord of my castle. This is my realm. I'm supposed to have sovereignty over my home and my family. And you don't have it today. Radar, it'll go right through your home. And I've got a lot of people that have not enjoyed that experience. And, cell phone radiation, even your neighbor's Wi-Fi. So you can go anything from what I talked about in the Weston A. Price article, very simple things you can do in your home, even without meters, all the way up to and including a purpose-built home to let you regain the sovereignty of your home so you can be king of your castle and not suffer this wireless trespass. And I've got 100 episodes telling people piece by piece, step by step, inch by inch, what you can do. And I don't see the end of it. I literally don't. It's not like I got to go back to, episode 1 because I'm running out of, no. It is a huge topic. So my best advice for everyone who's listening right here, and this is just the stupidest call to action ever, because this is where I lose control of it and I'm not making money. And so you can be sure it's good advice, right? Here's my advice. Go find somebody in your community, okay, who is skilled in this area. And you're like, well, I wouldn't know how to choose that person. Can you choose a mechanic?
Right.
Can you choose your dentist? Can you choose your barber? Can you choose your floor? Of course you can. What do you need to do? You need to learn some things about it. My podcast is free. Use it to learn a little bit about this topic, and then go find that person in your community and find out if they know what they're talking about. If they do, get them over to your house, have them do a professional assessment, and then they'll give you a plan that is unique to your family, to your tolerance for making change, your specific electromagnetic environment. I had a client a few years back that was looking at purchasing not one but 2 houses on the same plot of land here in Bonner County, and they were going to do it for investment purposes. These 2 houses were nearly identical, built by the same builder in the same time frame on the same piece of ground, and there was 50 or 60 feet between them. I mean, they were that close. One of them had a completely different electromagnetic profile than the other. What does that mean? That means the things that you would do in the first house are different from the things you would do in the second house to create those measurable reductions in synthetic EMF that we've talked about. So wherever you want to go, between the level of building a purpose-built home to regain your sovereignty, or the hugely great thing that you can do in your own community is find somebody who knows what they're doing. And not everything that glitters is gold, and there are wolves among the sheep, so be careful. Get that person out, the person that you can trust, or you can go to the Weston A. Price. If you're new at this, guys, turn your router off at night. Turn your cell phone off at night. See how you feel. If you're an adventurer like my friend Matthew, turn your house off at night. Mm-hmm. It'll get cold. Okay, probably won't die. Unless it's a blizzard out or whatever. Oh, the stuff in my refrigerator might get warm. I don't know. Maybe just don't open it until morning. I don't know. What's your tolerance for trying things? But I am really convinced that. In fact, I just wrote a paper about EMF challenge facilities, and the idea is a decentralized approach. And again, I'm not sitting in the catbird seat of it. This is an idea to be developed worldwide for individual entrepreneurs. What if people could check in short-term vacation rental, a very special short-term vacation rental, and it's going to be void of synthetic EMF? What if they could check in and see how they felt? Oh, I can think again. I can sleep again. I can remember again. My hands aren't buzzing. There's 1,000 different. My ears aren't ringing. That's a really common one as well. So this is a vast topic. We can go into any of these areas. I could tell you why the electric vehicle agenda is greenwashing, and it's going to destroy. It's going to destroy the electromagnetic environment, not only for the individual who owns it, but for all the houses around where those things are getting charged. I could tell you about radar and what the effects would be of that, and how it can be avoided. I could talk about how to choose safe land. I could talk more about studies. There was this great study in Japan where a foresighted doctor, this guy, I would like to buy him dinner. I just don't speak Japanese and I can't arrange it, but I don't know if he was living in this condominium, but it was a condominium that had cell phone towers on the top of it. And he knew they were scheduled to be decommissioned. He offered free medical exams to the people in this condominium. And then he charted in an anonymous way all the medical problems that these people were having. They shut down the cell phone towers on the roof of this building. Guess what happened? All of these instances of insomnia and all these different symptoms either went away entirely or almost entirely in just a very short period of time. That's the concept behind an EMF challenge facility is, what if you could have a short-term vacation rental, check in for a week, with your family, have a great time in the area and whatnot, and see what happens. So where do you want to go?
I love this. Yeah. Wow. So much information there. I love going back to that question too. Like, are you sovereign in your own household? That is a great question. How many things are being imposed against our will, even in our own household, that we supposedly own on our own? So that's a great topic. Lots of epic information. I think we got a lot of research. We got a lot of best practices for things we can do. Some philosophical stuff on like how there's no one size fits all diet for EMF protection. So I think we hit a lot of the main points. I just want to end with a few questions on some of your own, I guess, quote, research, if you will, because you've been doing a lot of EMF tests. So I figure we can close up with that. So I compiled a few different questions that I personally have that can get us thinking a little bit more about the things that we have in our environment that might be exposing us to EMF in ways that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. And so the first question I have for you is, have you done any EMF tests with key fobs on cars? Because they obviously are locking your car from a distance. So there must be some sort of signal going on. So what has been your experience with car fobs?
So I'm going to mention three words: convenience, amusement, and stimulation. These are the attack vectors that have been used over the last 100 years to lull us into this electromagnetic prison that we're in right now. Oh, Keith, you're crazy. Well, all right, maybe. So this one is convenience, right? I mean, who can't open the door, right? Have we devolved to that level in our society where we can't put a key in and turn it to get into the car? I mean, no offense, but it's a serious question, is it not? So the way those things work typically is they emit radio frequency radiation in order to trigger the lock coming up. It's just a tiny burst. It's just a very short duration, but it is a low enough frequency that the penetration is excellent. I saw a video, believe it or not, of this learned individual, I'll say, with maybe my tongue in my cheek, who would he was musing about this phenomenon of, sometimes my car is 100 meters away and I press my car fob and it doesn't open. And if I want it to open 100 yards away, I found out if I stick my car fob in my head like this and press the button, look, my car opens. I'm not kidding. This is something that how does that work? Well, the radiation goes through his head and it's like an antenna. So he's just made his head and his brain an antenna. And there's good research from, I think it was 1979, about the blood-brain barrier permeability with radio frequency radiation. So anyway, that's what I know about car fobs.
Fascinating. Yeah, I wanted to get that opinion. Lots of remote devices, not just key fobs, remote controllers, etc. So just extra things to start thinking about and pontificating on for EMF. Another one. So I was listening to a podcast this morning about EMF tests near running water, creeks, streams, waterfalls, rivers. Have you done any tests near running water, and have you seen any difference in effect there?
I have. So I was invited to test a new millimeter wave RF meter. So you could, for the first time, be able to assess what the millimeter wave radiation exposures are. And this was about a year and a half ago. So I was going all over Sandpoint, and I'm checking out the millimeter wave radiation that comes from vehicles now with an adjustable cruise control, adaptive cruise control, and these other features. And I'm checking that out, and I'm trying to make videos, and it's hard to get a video to show what you're seeing. And anyway, so I got tired of it, Matthew, and I just wanted to go someplace beautiful. So I went down to a place that's east of town by about maybe 20 minutes. And it was very, very remote. Okay. There's no power lines overhead. There's no cell phone towers around. And there's a stream running right through there, a creek running right through there. And it's just, that sound of a creek. It's just so enchanting, really. And it was lush, green, beautiful. And I'm like, oh man, I just want to take my shoes off. I want to put my feet here, and and I did a little photography because I'm into photography, and I'm just starting to relax. And I thought, I wonder what the exposures are right here. So I go, I got my gear in the car. So I checked it out, and from an RF exposure perspective, there was still a cell phone signal. It was better than you would have in any kind of a city or a town, but I was disappointed there was any. I go, okay. And then I almost didn't check, but I wanted to look at the alternating current magnetic fields and the alternating current electric fields. And I'm thinking, this is dumb. I'm way out here in nature, 20 minutes from what we would call a city. And anyway, no electric fields. Okay, because it couldn't see any power lines. I checked the magnetic fields. They were enormous. Enormous. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be here. They were high enough. I didn't want to be there. And I thought, what a tragedy. You had that beautiful sound of the water, and you had the beautiful, sight of the green. but I knew enough about the research that I didn't want to spend any time there. So, yeah, I think some point in the 21st century, everybody's going to need to be able to do at least a preliminary look at their environment. And these cheap all-in-one meters, I'm sorry, they don't have the level of accuracy and sensitivity to accomplish that. But if you want to get serious about having a small kit that you can carry around and really check out what is a good, healthy environment, yeah, get in touch with me or check out my work. But yeah, so I think what was happening in that case, Matthew, is like, why would this magnetic field be here? And the answer is every electron that goes out from power generation through these various substations, and that is utilized in houses all over the country, 1,850 square miles we have in Bonner County. Every electron has to return to the point of distribution or the point of generation. And all I can think is, since there was no infrastructure anywhere nearby, that creek, it was highly mineralized and it was damp and it provided less resistance. And so you had current that would otherwise flow uniformly over the earth saying, hey, this is better here, flowing up this little beautiful area. So that's a little bit about.
Interesting. So we'll have to dive into that some more. And we're moving into a riverfront house pretty soon here, so we might have to do some tests and see what's being carried on that river. So fascinating. And you mentioned minerals. So that was my next question is, do you think that, especially with the electromagnetic portion, depending on diet, obviously minerals have some level of conductivity, and I'm sure other micronutrients and microtoxins have a conductivity level. Do you think that some people are better at absorbing microtoxins and environmental toxins due to their diet? And if you know anything about minerals, like how do you think that all plays into your ability to, one, withstand toxins and then also absorb toxins?
Yeah, so people who are concerned with science want to say that there's no known mechanism of harm with synthetic EMF exposure, and they would be wrong. Because a gentleman by the name of Dr. Martin Paul, who was 38 years as a professor, and he had a electrical engineering background at Caltech, and then he went on to do whatever in his PhD. And anyway, very, very active in the synthetic EMF world. And what he saw in the research after he retired, I believe, was something called the voltage-gated calcium channel effect. And so what it is in the presence of various phenomenon of EMF, the cell's ability to regulate the inflow of calcium ions into the cell is altered. We're born with this perfect ability to say, I would like a little more calcium ions, please, on a cell-by-cell basis. And then, I have plenty of calcium ion, no more for me. And then they close these voltage-gated calcium channels. Beautiful mechanism. That points to creation. Anyway, so what he showed is in the presence of synthetic EMF, it just forces the barn doors open and you have this massive influx of calcium ions. Probably also maybe sodium and potassium, I'm not sure, but we do have a known mechanism of harm, and it involves this calcium, for example, maybe potassium and sodium as well. So, and then you ask the question about do different people respond differently to the presence of this type of toxin? Absolutely. Some people become very sensitive to airborne pollutants. Some people become very sensitive to like synthetic chemicals. I don't know how all that works. The feeling among the people that I like to hang out with, those who have been severely affected, is that those people who have the best immune system are affected the most, which is an interesting thing to consider. But So what do? You know, it gets back to this desire of, is there a supplement I can take? No, no. You may be calcium deficient. I don't know. That's for you and your naturopath to figure out. But there's nothing you can take that's going to make it okay to live in a foreign environment. And people want to reach for that. So where I'm at on all this is Weston A. Price, man. It's all about proper inputs in the body and withhold the toxins. And, you know, doing that with locally grown foods would be my, you know, that's where my heart is at.
Cool.
And get your minerals that way as opposed to in capsules.
Right.
Get the sunshine in your life, things like that.
Very cool. Awesome. I love it. And then final question for you. So one thing I heard about is that in winter, like in the dead of winter when it's the coldest, there's more oxygen in the air, right? Versus nitrogen, carbon, and all that kind of stuff. And so that made me think about EMF and other things. Have you noticed in your tests, summer versus winter, or different areas closer to the equator, further from the equator? Are there effects on the environment and seasons that may increase or decrease your exposure to EMF?
I'd like to make a study in Ecuador, and if anybody would like to help fund that. 'Cause I can't speak to, you know, the equator or near and far further from the equator. I can speak to the summer, winter, and in fact, different times of the day. So this is interesting to think about. Now, the power generation capability isn't the same summer and winter in certain climates. And the utilization is not the same all hours of the day. So typically, as I understand it, when people are getting up and getting ready in the morning, you have a kind of a peak power usage. And then in the evening, when they come home, you have another peak power usage. So you can do something that's really exotic, and not a lot of people opt for this. But the meters that I have that allow me to assess these different phenomena of EMF are recording meters. So I can stick a data recorder on there, and we can look at your electric fields, your magnetic fields, we can look at your radio frequency radiation, and we can see how that varies according to time of day. And so for here, Matthew, in the wintertime, a lot of people heat with electric power. Those overhead power lines are going to be throwing off a lot bigger magnetic field.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and your utilization within your home is going to do that. So there is going to be a difference both within a day and within a season.
Got it. Very fascinating. Yeah, I haven't thought about that, how there's definitely more electronic use in winter. Electric bills go up, so that would naturally mean more electromagnetic type stuff going on. So very fascinating. Well, thank you, Keith. I appreciate all of this information. This is really going to help my audience, and I hope it helps your audience too. So we'll definitely, in the description, we'll include some information on EMF Remedy. Any place that you recommend people go to learn more about what you've got going on at EMF Remedy and all your endeavors?
Sure. You can check out my Substack, where my writing is. And that's Keith Cutter, KEITHCUTTER .substack.com. My YouTube channel is at EMF Remedy. And then I have an audio podcast, and that's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you know, any place that you might be looking for an audio podcast. And it is also called EMF Remedy.
Amazing. Well, there you have it, folks. Appreciate you, Keith. Thank you so much for your time and all your knowledge and information. And yeah, definitely like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, and check out the links in the description for more information. Thank you guys so much. God bless.
All right. God bless you guys. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.